Hey, all you beautiful Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our workplace can fix our world, we got a real treat for you today. We're talking about turning intent into global culture, how to scale that tone at the top, that ever elusive tone at the top. So as we get started today, well, before we get started, let's get a massive emoji exposure to our phenomenal panel. You are going to absolutely love these guys. We have Tara, we have Kershwin, and the one and only Matt Kelly. And so as we get started, as always, every week, I want to remind you, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. So you got to drop that LinkedIn URL in the chat. You got to take advantage of this unique thing. You know, I keep saying it. Maybe you don't think it's unique. It's extremely unique. This community that we're all a part of as ethics and compliance professionals. Don't reinvent the wheel. You get no bonus points for that in life for reinventing the wheel. A lot of great, cool announcements. Also dropping where you're coming from today and how excited you are that school is about to get back in session and get these kids out of your hair, okay? So if you're here for credits, this is the place to be. There's so much phenomenal thought leadership out there, so you got to be tapping into that. So many great podcasts that I love. So if you're not listening, if you're not feeding your mind, you're just going to kind of wither, okay? So you have to continue to add, new ideas, new perspectives, and there's so much great thought leadership coming out in our space. I know we featured this book a couple of times, but we're giving away the one and only Reed Blackman's The Ethical Nightmare Challenge. We've gotten great feedback on this book. It's a really great. It's full of a really cool, it talks about this really cool framework on how to manage this new emerging risk in our organizations, which is AI. How do you actually push AI governance down to the decision points where all these myriad AI use cases are being employed? So stay active in the chat today and win yourself a book, or head on over to Amazon and pick one up for yourself. Our benchmark report, we're still pushing it because as long as I keep getting DMs and, hearing praise for this phenomenal benchmark report, I'm going to keep pushing it. So I would encourage you, if you're sick of hearing me ramble here, download this thing real quick and take a look at the various pages in it. There's a lot of great insights in there, and it really has a lot of great tactics on how to use your data to inform the decisions that you need to make within your organization. So there's a lot, on Tuesday, we had a great episode with Valerie Cloud, and she was talking about a lot of the principles that were kind of underlying this benchmark report. So if you missed that, tune into our YouTube channel and definitely check it out. It was about leveraging your hotline data in order to, make better decisions and paint a better picture to the board. We also have launched Third Party Plus. So we're launching all kinds of stuff this year. So we launched Third Party Plus. This is an AI-driven third-party risk management platform. So you probably have a bunch of due diligence that you need to do, if not across the entire, if not across the entire process, at least tied to the compliance facet of your third-party due diligence. And that is a process that, in our experience and in our research and from conversations with clients, is really just a patchwork of a bunch of different people, a bunch of different, chefs in the kitchen, so to speak, that has a lot of inefficiency surrounding this job that is, usually tied to revenue and usually something that ends up kind of holding up that process. So there's a lot of AI-able tasks that can be done with this third-party due diligence. And so what's great about Third Party Plus is that it leverages AI. AI does the work, it does the research for you, and your team can make the decision. So if you're interested in learning about how that can cut some time out, give you a better picture of the risk landscape of your portfolio of your third parties, definitely give us a shout. We've got a bunch of cool stuff to talk about here. Ethicsverse Day, people are still talking about it. My Twitter feed is full of people still continuing to talk about how great Ethicsverse Day was. We had 4,900 attendees, largest ethics and compliance event in the world. So if you missed that, head over to our YouTube channel. Official Ethico is what it's called. Give us a like and subscribe if you don't mind. And look at some of those replays. We had really phenomenal sessions all day. So we also have a bunch of new resources that we've added to the Ethicsverse Day toolkit, right? We put out about 20 different resources that you can leverage for free, of course, because we love you, to improve your program. So go ahead and check that out. And, right around the corner here, we have SCCE. So if you're heading down to Orlando for SCCE, circle your calendars for the Ethico cocktail party that's going to be on Monday night, September 28th, from 6:30 to 9:30. It's going to be fun. If it's anything like our last couple of cocktail parties, it's going to be the place to be. It's right there on in that ballroom there, that Butler ballroom that everybody loves. Also, I have heard so many times from so many people in our space who haven't been to SCCE, who haven't, their company won't, spend the money to send them to SCCE. So your good friends at Ethico, we are starting a we're doing a kind of a scholarship. So if you would like to be considered for the scholarship, drop something in the chat and we'll reach out to you. It doesn't look like our form is up on here, but you can fill out a little form and we're going to select someone to go to SCCE in September on us. It's a month away. So we'll cover your plane ticket, your registration, and your, what else? Your hotel. Okay. You know, if your stingy CFO won't spend a couple of bucks to get you better and get you smarter, we will take care of that for you. So drop some ones in the chat and we'll reach out to you afterwards with the form. And before I wrap up here, if you're not following Matt Kelly on LinkedIn and you're not following Radical Compliance, then what's wrong with you? So open up a new tab, go to radicalcompliance.com and sign up for his newsletter. He never spams you. He just gives you great content, great information to make you sound smarter and to be a better compliance officer. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to the coolest guy in compliance and the funniest compliance officer in the world, Kershwin and Tara. How are you guys doing today?
Hey, Nick.
Great.
Thank you very much.
I feel like we need a walk-up music for that.
We do need some walk-up music. We need a harp, maybe. All right, go ahead.
So thank you very much, Nick, for the kind words and the introduction. And hello, everybody who is listening today, this week. Thank you very much. We are talking about tone at the top at your organization and how you can leverage the tone at the top to foster a stronger corporate culture of ethics and compliance. This is an idea that actually came from one of our speakers today, Kershwin Singh, and I will introduce our speakers in a moment. But this is one of those things that I love to talk about because in just about every instance, it's not like the top is opposed to corporate compliance or they hate ethics. All of them pretty much to a T will say, oh yeah, sure, I'm in favor of ethics and compliance at my company. What can I do to help? But then actually building a program that you can ask your top executives to participate in. And what does that program look like? How do you leverage their stance within the company? Which people do you want to select? How do you help them do this? How do you help them help you to have a strong culture of compliance? That's all the stuff that we want to talk about today. So the first person I'll introduce is Kershwin Singh. He is a lawyer and compliance officer who previously had been with Zoll Medical. He's been at Pfizer. He's been at Boehringer Ingelheim, mostly life sciences, pharmaceutical sector, and things like that. But Kershwin was the one who said that he thought this would be a good subject. I agreed with him, and so here we are. Kershwin, thank you very much for joining us today. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
And also joining us, his co-panelist is Tara Shuchuk. Tara is the Chief Privacy, Integrity, and Compliance Officer at Medtronic. And she's another one who thinks about tone at the top and how you can leverage that resource as a compliance officer, thinks about it a lot. Tara, thank you for joining us here as well.
Oh, great. Happy to be here. One of my favorite topics.
And then, as always, for all of you who are listening, I have a bunch of questions. If you want me to talk with Kershwin and Tara and Nick for the rest of the hour, I could. But by all means, if you have comments about what you've done with tone at the top or where you might be struggling to figure out how to do it, questions you want to ask, comments on what we're saying, by all means, put that into the chat. The more interactive we can make this, the more relevant it is for you. So we are always looking for listener feedback, even as it happens. Nominally, I will save up the questions until the last 10 minutes or so. But in reality, if you ask a good question, I'm going to pop that to Tara, Nick, and Kershwin right away. With all of that said, I will first give a kickoff question. I'll start by putting it to Kershwin first, and then Tara, and then Nick. But could we please even define what we are talking about here? Yes, tone at the top is crucial for a successful compliance program. But when we talk about leveraging tone at the top, what does that mean? What does that entail, and what are you trying to get the tone at the top to do? Kershwin, I'll start with you, and then Tara, and then Nick. Please define what we're talking about.
Sure, thanks, Matt. So tone at the top is basically a framework describing how corporate culture and ethics cascade through an organization. The executives team sets the formal rules, middle managers shape the daily work climate, and then you have the frontline employees reflect this in their everyday conversations and their behaviors. So what we've noticed is employees mirror leadership behavior, whether it's good or bad. Leadership sets the standards for that ethical behavior. And we also know that actions speak louder than policies. So modeling matters. And that's why it's important to have a program like Tone at the Top.
Mm-hmm. And Tara, give us your views on this too. And when we're talking about leveraging or using the Tone at the Top, are we asking them to do something? Are you building an official program that lasts for 30 days, or is it a longer reaching thing? How do you define what we're trying to unpack here today?
Yeah, well, Kirshman gave a great overview, I think, at the 30,000 foot level. What I would add to it would be, it's ultimately, it's culture. And, everyone's heard the phrase culture eats strategy for lunch. I think that definitely plays out here. And you want your senior most leaders, really starting at the board, going down to the C-suite, and then from there down to middle management and so on, to be setting that tone, that culture, that climate, of integrity that you want to see, your line employees act on. And Kirshman, as he said, it's like actions speak louder than words. It's the say-do ratio. So the words matter a lot. But it's more than words. And so I know we're going to talk more about sort of like how do you actually activate that and what are some practical tips? How do you go about it? But I'd say it's words and actions. And maybe one other piece to add in, it's also teaching our leaders to be good listeners. Because it's not just about what they say and do, it's about how do they listen and how are they creating that climate where there's safety to raise concerns and, truly want to understand what's happening in the organization and then, take some action on it.
Okay. And then Nick, I'll give you a chance here too. I'm trying to sketch out what are the boundaries of the Tone at the Top, what goes into that, how do the leaders actually think about it? We've got a bunch of compliance officers thinking about it, but how the leaders themselves see what their job is trying to set the tone for the company. That's a very vague phrase.
Yeah, it's super vague. And somebody gave me this example once of back in the day, apparently they had everybody went to work on trains. And when you would get off at the train station, you would look up, and this is back before people had, they'd have to wind their watch. So they would set their watch to that big clock in the train station, in the morning so that they would be, wouldn't miss their train home at the end of the night. And I think all employees are setting their clock or setting their watch to some clock, and that clock is maybe at the CEO level, but it also exists on their team level or whoever their local leader is. Pardon me. And so I think when we're talking about leveraging Tone at the Top, we need to think about what does the word leverage mean and what is Tone at the Top? I think leverage by definition is putting out a little bit of effort to get, a lot of output. And when we have these big clocks throughout our organization, pulling them into our program and reminding them that a lot of people are setting their watch by, as our guests have said, not just by the words that they say, but the actions that they take. We can really kind of employ them in a much greater degree, so we don't feel like we're swimming upstream and trying to dig a hole with a spoon. I think the Tone at the Top thing often gets sort of mischaracterized as a CEO video. Those are fine, and those are good. But I think the things that have a lot more weight are the things that have a cost. So a CEO putting out a video once a year, just as a point of comparison, of CEO putting a video out once a year that says your voice matters, use the speak up line, is very different and sends, I think, an important message, but it sends a different message than at a quarterly business review talking about a deal that they didn't do or that, he didn't do because of some kind of an ethical issue. I think when there's a cost attached to those words, those always have a little bit more weight.
Okay. And all right, now I want to try and talk a little bit more practically about what the compliance officer is actually trying to do when we mobilize or leverage the Tone at the Top, as in what are the actual objectives that a compliance program has where getting the leaders activated or involved, that's the best way to do it. And I guess maybe, Tara, I'll start with you and then Kirshwin. But I was thinking through, there's a lot of tactical stuff that compliance programs have to do drafting policies for anti-corruption or testing controls for consumer privacy policies or something like that. That a lot of it is granular, and mobilizing the tone at the top isn't that. But like I said before, why are we doing this? Why would that be worthwhile of a compliance officer's time? What's the objective that you want to achieve for a good compliance program where tone at the top and mobilizing tone and getting that involved, like that's the way to do it? Tara, what would you say first, Kirshwin?
Yeah, I mean, I'll it's a great question, Matt. I'll kind of pivot back for a minute to culture and really, you know, what we achieve is through people in any organization. You can have a lot of policies for sure, and policies are important. But it comes down to execution at the individual level. And so coming back again to culture and the importance of the why here in ensuring that our senior most leaders are setting that right tone, setting that right culture is ultimately to ensure that we have an effective program. And one of the key hallmarks in my view is around speak up culture. And so, you know, making sure that employees feel like the leaders value integrity, that they value the importance of speaking up, and that they expect employees to speak up and raise their hand when they have a concern, or even more so when they have a point of view on something that might be different, because that leads to innovation. So I'd say, you know, culture is a control. It's not just a nice to have. It actually is a core risk control from both a speak up angle and making sure that we are getting the right information coming to us, the right signals. We don't have blind spots. We're feeding our innovation loops. And so that's kind of like a big why in my view as to getting leaders motivated around this. And I found it pretty effective to get leaders motivated into the why, because they have to understand why you're enlisting them to, like, hey, do this thing for me. And again, we're going to talk about some of those, what are those things and what are those tactics? But I think getting leaders to even buy in and understand what the value is to the organization, and again, tying it back to culture, to speak up, to mitigating risk, but also feeding innovation, I've found to be really highly effective. And then, you know, maybe just also to mention, and I'll hand it over to Kirshwin for his ideas. I think that having a plan actually is really helpful in tactics around this. So it isn't just kind of like one-off ideas, but it's actually intentional and with an assigned kind of set of tactics and plans. And so we can talk a little bit more about how that feeds into you execute on this.
Okay. And then Kirshwin, give me your take on this too. And I really like how Tara was saying the purpose of engaging the tone at the top, or the top, is to, they can answer the why are we doing this question. And somebody else here in the comments, a listener, Tony, had just said that the culture is the foundation upon which all other controls sit. And you can have a great looking set of tactical control activities. And if nobody's answered why are we doing this, then okay, you've got a lot of window dressing that doesn't work. I think that's a very good point. But Kirshman, what do you see as, like, why are we doing this? Why is this a smart strategy for an effective compliance program? What do you gain by doing that?
So, I mean, you gain education by all your employees, but I agree with the culture, and I also agree with what Tara said about cascading. So when I think about tone at the top, it's not just senior management, it's all managers in an organization as you roll out the program. Mm-hmm. There's data to show that employees listen to their managers more than anyone else at the company, even more than the CEO. I've worked at some large companies, and this is not a joke. I've asked people, who do you think the CEO is? And people don't know the name of the CEO at some large companies. I'm talking about people on the manufacturing floor, people maybe in more junior roles than what we're used to in the C-suite and in management, right? So employees take direction from their manager. Their manager controls their bonus, their salary increase, their performance reviews. They're more likely to listen to their manager than what the CEO says. And I think you had mentioned that the CEO could put out a video once a year, but on a daily basis, they work with their managers, and what their managers say is very important. So having this cascade and having this tone reinforces the culture, reinforces doing the right thing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Nick?
maybe just to tag on to Kirschman just for a second, because I think that, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that middle management piece, but he's so spot on. You know, employees get direction from their more direct manager, and they also report more frequently. I think some data from Ethicsverse around 60% of concerns that are raised go directly to an employee's manager. So hitting that full spectrum of leadership and making sure that they're setting that right tone and creating that open environment is just so critical.
You know, could I also just ask, and maybe Kirschman, I'll pivot back to you here because I think you've run tone at the top engagement programs for a bit. Who are we actually talking about? Clearly, the CEO is the pinnacle of the top, but how many other executives would be really like in a tone at the top program? Because we already do have lots of people lighting up the importance of middle managers in the listener chat, and we'll get to the middle managers too. But is it the CEO alone? Is it the CEO and the CFO? Is it divisional managers? In theory, if you have different business units around the world, is it the general managers? Like, who's in the group that gets asked to go forth and spread the gospel of a strong culture and compliance? How do you define who's on that invite list? Kirschman, what's your experience been? And then Tara, I'd love to get your thoughts on that too.
Well, first you have to get buy-in, right? Depending on the size of the company, if you have a 50,000 person employee company, where do you go and get the buy-in? What I believe is best is to think about what division or business unit or country you want to launch the program in and get buy-in from the most senior person of that division, business unit, or country, right? Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. The buy-in is not going to be the most difficult thing, but then it's deciding which managers you're going to have to train, because you have to train people on how to deliver this message. You cannot rely on business people delivering the message the way you expect them to, with the way you expect it should be. So the way I did it was you come up with something random. Anyone with 5 or more direct reports will provide a tone at the top presentation or scenario to their teams. And then you just get buy-in from the most senior person saying, hey, would this work? Would anyone with 5 or more be able to do this? This is how long it's going to take. This is how easy it's going to be. And I'd like to make it mandatory. Making it mandatory changes the dynamic completely.
Okay. But in a favorable way?
Yeah, I think definitely in a favorable way, because you can keep some data. The way we had launched it was we invited all the managers with the 5 or more direct reports. And we said, this is what we would like you to present. We don't want you to have a separate meeting to discuss these topics. We want you to tag it onto an existing meeting that you have. And this is going to fail if you say that compliance told you to do it. You need to tell everyone at the company or your employees that you believe in compliance, you believe in doing the right thing. And as a result, you're just sharing some information on different policies, on different concepts that you think would help them. And then we also got people to attest. So it was, I'm inviting 100 of you to this meeting and teaching you how to present. I'm sharing with you the training deck or the scenarios, which is a 1-pager with some questions and answers. And after you do it, you need to attest that you have done it and give us some feedback. So, managers didn't love it at times because they're like, there's another thing to do. It's a compliance related thing. I'm not good at this. But the key is to make it as easy as possible, simple as possible for them to deliver the message. And then it does depend on the department, right? You have a department like R&D. You have the leader there saying, I'd love my people to present. They don't ever get a chance to present. They're such introverts. I would love them to. I'd like to get them to do it twice a year. And then you get other departments like sales are like, we're inundated with training. We know this. I don't want to share this if I don't have to. It's going to take time away from selling. So it also, you have to sell the program to the managers of why it's important and what's in it for them.
Okay. And Tara, give me your take on these same issues here about who you would look to include in the top program and, who are the tops and who's not. And how do you win them over? And at what point do you go from winning them over to saying, and also this, we want this to be mandatory? Like, how do you navigate all of that? What do you see as good practice?
Well, it's a Rubik's Cube to some degree. I mean, and there are different tactics and individuals that you want to engage depending on what problem you're trying to solve and what lever you're trying to pull. So let me just maybe pull that apart with some examples. Certainly the C-suite. So I've engaged the C-suite, including the CEO, on a number of levels for certain messages and activities. I've also engaged a board member in delivering some messages to our employee base. And so that would be like at the senior most levels of the company. And I'll give, again, some like actual specifics around that in just a second. And then also for the example that Christian was just given, some what we call ethics circles. We have some case studies that are intended to either be somewhat long conversations, like unpacking Boeing and what went wrong in Boeing from a speak up culture and how we can make sure that we don't have that happen at our company, which can be an hour-long conversation in an R&D organization. We can create tools and expectations around that, all the way to like a 5-minute stand-up conversation on a manufacturing floor related to patient safety or even employee safety. So we've done those different types of tactics more in the middle level, including in a mandatory way. So like the way Christian described it, and when I mention a tactic and what's the purpose, like what are you trying to achieve? In that situation, we went mandatory with like this 5-minute stand up at the manufacturing floor because we saw some pockets of issues that we wanted to get in front of. We were seeing lower reports of concerns coming through. We were seeing other reports coming through in our hotline that suggested concerns around speak up culture. And so we went with a different set of tactics there and more of a mandatory approach. And we actually saw incredible results coming out of that, by the way, because we did some data, kind of before and after, and showed that the speak up results really improved, as did engagement and inclusion feelings. But to go back to the senior most levels for a second, again, it goes back to the buy-in and what's in it for the organization. But I would say some things that we've found to be pretty successful in engaging, the CEO and other members of the C-suite are things like our annual integrity awards. So we have an award every year that goes out to, and it's a signature award. The whole company hears about it. We celebrate these individuals just like we do from like a quality perspective in a different set of awards. But our integrity award is called our Compass Award after our code of conduct, which is the Compass. It's something that the CEO champions. We tell the stories about those employees. We have a celebration with them and about them and for them, and the CEO is like right there front and center celebrating those stories. So those are ways in which we really want to engage our senior most leader. Similarly, we have an integrity week once a year, and every year there's a kickoff video that usually me and the CEO, and in this case, this last year, we had an Olympics theme, and both the CEO and I are hockey fans. And so we both suited up with Medtronic jerseys, and we were passing the puck around to kick off Integrity Week. And obviously with messages that went along with that, but sprinkling in a little bit of fun, a little bit of engagement around a rallying cry of purpose, I think has been really effective and good ways to leverage senior leaders. One other example I'll give is, and again, kind of sprinkling in some fun and engaging elements. We've run some video series, kind of tackling typical ethical issues, whether it's a conflict of interest issue or like a meals situation in the med device life sciences space. And we use kind of mock cases in a sense, and we have people play parts in these video vignettes. And I've done this in different companies, actually, not just my current company. Enlisting senior leaders to play a part in these videos, they love it. They actually are often kind of showmen, show people little quiet actors on the side, and they like being part of these videos. We like to show them at national sales meetings. The employees get a kick out of it, seeing their general manager or their president of their business unit acting a part in a doctor interaction or something like that goes wrong. I think those have been really effective to like get the buy-in, get some fun around it, and get employees engaged.
So, Nick, let me loop you in here to give us some thoughts to what you've been hearing, and also maybe a pretty good question from a listener here that basically said employees, when they hear tone at the top, they fall into two camps. Camp number one says, okay, yeah, because this is just boss going through the motions, and you need to win group two over to overcome the employee cynicism. Like, that's hard. How clear that they want ethics and compliance to be at the heart of everything. Like, how do we win them over? So what is Nick?
Yeah, I think can you hear me okay?
Yep. You there, Nick?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Go for it.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I think I had some audio issues there. I think we're always going to have these sort of two camps. It's easy to kind of divide the world in half in many different ways. And I think, we have to kind of assume positive intent, and maybe this is my bright eyes and bushy tail, but like, I feel like any of that cynicism is coming from people that are, as Ellen Hunt calls them, like these ethical refugees. When we first come out of school or you get your first job, you're, ready to take on the world and you're so eager and all that stuff. And then, you fall into these corporate machines, and many times you get kind of chewed up and spit out, or your expectations don't get met, or, the glossy pictures and the code of conduct are not really indicative of the reality that you see day to day inside the organization. And so I think it's a natural sort of self-preservation mechanism to kind of build this kind of cynicism. But I think that is a carapace that's built over that sort of soft, gooey sort of center. And people want to believe that. They want to believe those things. And they want to believe that the world can be a better place and things like that. So I think how you win those folks over, it's probably not a magic wand, but it's like the cynicism is from, this is just lip service. I think it's lip service and it's not real. And I think you make it real by like talking about it a lot and actually making it real. If I'm always telling my children to be polite and I'm always telling them say please and thank you, and then we're out at a restaurant and I don't say please and thank you to a server, well, then there's that sort of kind of dissonance that's going to cause them to not really like buy into this, politeness like program that I'm trying to like push consistently. But I think that's kind of a good analogy as well, because, I've said it 1,000 freaking times to say please and thank you. Like you have to like pound it into people's minds, and I think they have to hear that from each other, and they have to hear that from their local, top, their local leader, and the executive team. And one other thing I'll just say is, there's this famous story of Alcoa. And Alcoa was a company that was in trouble. It was a steel manufacturer, I think, and it was back in like the late 80s. And this guy, O'Neill, took over the company, and somebody died early on. I'm going to mess this up a little bit, but this is like effectively true. Somebody died early on, and that like lit a fire under this guy, O'Neill. And he brought all of his executives together. A guy got caught in a machine and died, on the plant floor. And he said, this is not the workers' fault. Of course they had safety policies and all that stuff. He said, this is my leadership, this is my fault, and this is our fault. And we're going to make this the safest organization in the world with zero injuries. And he really prioritized this employee safety thing to the point where he told, all the investors that this was his main, agenda item. Every meeting, they would start with a brief 2-minute kind of safety minute that would be passed around to different sort of leaders. It's a really great case study for this, because I think it's a perfect corollary to this culture of integrity that kind of exists, across all organizations, manufacturing or otherwise. And, he was able to like, 5x revenue in the company, and just like grow the company many times over, really rooted down into what ultimately became like a commitment to quality. That was a constant sort of cohesive chorus across all of the leadership. They really pushed this culture of safety forward. And it wasn't just from one statement once per year. It was every single meeting. There was a couple of minutes kind of talking about employee safety. And that shifted over time. Obviously it wasn't like immediate, but over time, presumably there was these two groups in Alcoa. You know what I'm saying? Like you had the people that were like, yes, all about safety, and the other people that were like, this is lip service. I wear my hard hat, and this is fine. But I'm just saying, he wouldn't have been able to have the success, and that company wouldn't have been able to have the success that it had if there wasn't actual buy-in, and he wasn't able to pull those people from group 2 into group 1 on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's possible, but it takes like a real concerted effort across the organization. And the more people you can get kind of singing from that song sheet, the higher the likelihood that people, all the stakeholders in the organization kind of harmonize around that song.
It's funny, as you're mentioning Alcoa, another example I have heard of in the past was DuPont, that for many years they had their set of core values. I don't remember exactly what the values are, but I think there were about 4. But compliance leaders at DuPont would tell me that pretty much any DuPont meeting anywhere from any number of, if you were more than 2 employees at the water cooler, you had to start the meeting by saying, we are here for this, and it relates back to this of the 4 values. Every single time, every single meeting, even if you were just at the water cooler because you were thirsty, you also had to connect it back to why it mattered as a core value. But it was that permanence and consistency that eventually drilled home to everyone that this is something they take seriously. Gershwin, I wanted to loop back to you for a bit more specifics or examples of what are the things that you help or that you give to the local managers somewhere to help them be good when they are talking about ethics and compliance as part of what they're doing. And I don't know, like if you mentioned case studies or you work with them, do you do drills with them? How does that all work?
So there's different components to it. The way we did it is we had short presentations, and then we also had one-page case studies. Yep. And we chose multiple examples, right? So because people in different parts of the organization have different interests. So as a medical device or a pharmaceutical company, you think about AdvaMed code or the pharma code. But other topics that we created content on were conflicts of interests, reporting concerns is always important, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, the travel and entertainment, and now social media or the use of AI, right? Those are all topics that a manager will decide, oh, this is going to be important to my team. So the presentations that we created were 10 pages, 12 pages, and we walked them to how to present. But we also had notes in the presentation that they could only see. So it made it easier for them to present, right? So the audience thought, oh, they really know a lot about compliance, but they were also our notes that they could use or they didn't have to. And then when you're talking about, that's the presentation. But then the case study would be a one-pager. And as you click through, it'll have 2 questions. You'd have a group discussion. Hey, what do you think about these 2 questions? And then you click it again and they'll provide some answers. So we made it really easy for the managers to share that, very, not burdensome, and where they could just tack it on to any meeting that they were already having with their employees.
But ultimately, they had some discretion to say, I'm going to use this compliance example that Gershwin gave me, not this other one. You gave them a menu of, 4 or 5 choices, and whatever seemed suitable for them, they got to choose that. That's how it works.
They got to choose the topic. So whether it's conflicts of interest or reporting concerns, and in the conflicts of interest deck, we also had 3 different subtopics, because if you're in manufacturing, you'll choose an example that's manufacturing related. If you're in sales, you'll choose an example that's sales related. If you're in procurement, you'll choose a procurement example. So we also showed them that we really customized it for you. You decide what you want to share.
Okay,
it's great.
Tara, let me ask you a slightly different question here. Let's say the tone at the top, the top is engaged in this. It's very exciting. You've had the sales meeting where you are doing hockey pucks with the CEO. I would expect nothing less from a Minnesota company, by the way. But
and I'm Canadian, actually, so it all fits.
Oh, it runs even deeper.
But how do you assure that there is consistency and follow-up over the long term? Like, how do you take what they have done, because that's a good and valuable, impactful moment when the tone at the top happens. But you, the compliance team, you have to make sure that it sticks and follows up. And like, how do you make sure it's a good and durable thing after the big meeting or the discussion or whatever it is?
Yeah, I know it's a great question. I think it goes to this durability piece that Nick was sharing with the story. Like, I think the alcohol example is a premier version of that and a hyper focus. But I'd say, even just a little attenuated from that, you can and should keep the tactics alive. So it's not just a one point in time, blast, but it's a regular and methodical and just consistent touch point. And it's happening at these various levels. So, we mentioned these senior levels, the C-suite. It's also happening in this middle layer, Kershwin especially diving in there. And I think it's that combination of all those things so that you're keeping that constant touch point with employees and that they're seeing that the company, that this matters to the company and that the company is making, these concerted, not just what we say, but also what we do, like how are we showing up on a regular basis. I would, so it's this consistency and making sure that you're driving that over time. And I have members of my team that certainly help drive that consistency. And that's part of their goals and objective is to make sure that this is happening across the 30 businesses and, 140 countries that we operate in around the world kind of thing. And so that is, a very, pardon me?
What do the team members who are in charge of making sure it still drives forward? Like, what do they do? What do they look for? What do they track?
Yeah. So I think having the tools, so we have tools as well to make it easy for the leaders. And so if it's not organically happening, because some leaders are just more naturally interested and comfortable with some of these types of conversations, and others are less comfortable or less it becomes less easy for them. And so paying attention to it, bringing the tools forward when maybe it's not happening as naturally as it could or it should, and bringing things like the case studies or helping just nudge reminders to say, hey, you just had a town hall, or you have better yet, you have a town hall coming up. Why don't you make sure that you say XYZ, that we always do business the right way, and lead with a patient story as to why, doing what's right for the patient always is better for our mission and feeds into our integrity. There's a lot of different examples that you can use, but kind of real time providing those nudges to our leaders is part of what our compliance leaders do on a regular basis, and then giving them those turnkey tools when they want to dive deeper, I think is also really critical.
Okay. Nick, tell me
measurement. Maybe just one other comment on that is what gets measured gets done. And so we do have an ethics score that, at least at my company, we leverage, so there's employee engagement surveys that most companies do. We also have an ethics score that shows up for every leader of at least 5 employees, all the way up to the top of the company. So there's a company-wide score, and then there's scores that go down all the way down to if you're a leader of 5 or more, you get a score. And so if your score is below what we expect, then we expect you to drive that score better, meaning that there's something that's not working. There's some disconnect within your team around ethical culture, and you need to help manage that and make it better. And we're there to help. I mean, Again, going back to the tools and the tactics, we can help you with that, but you need to pay attention to it, and the data helps drive that.
All right. And
we should have a whole session on that thing. I mean, that's so cool because it gives you something tangible to affect. You know what I'm saying? It gives you something tangible to have a conversation about versus it just feels like you're not ethical. It's like, here's a number, 40 lashes.
And leaders like data. Leaders love data, and they respond to data.
Well, so Nick, I was going to ask you for your thoughts on something like this, the ethics score, which for real, we could have a whole session on that. That's a fantastic idea. But how teams and leaders can make these changes sustainable and stick, aside from just talking about them. Are we measuring things, or what are we looking to measure? If we find something is substandard, how do we pressure people to pull it up? And any thoughts about how to the mechanics of making this change last?
Yeah. I mean, it's probably a challenge, right? It seems like all change is is a struggle. You know, you're pushing like a rock up the hill. You're changing habits, you're changing behaviors and all that kind of stuff. And like managers are not different types of people. They fall into these two different camps. There are some people that, you know, you roll this out to and they say, okay, cool, I got to do this. I'm going to go ahead and do it. These kind of high conscientious people. Other people are maybe have less follow through, and you might have to remind them all the time, which again kind of leads to why it's important to have some kind of level of, you know, relationship with these people that you're trying to influence, as opposed to just sending an email that gets filed or maybe never gets read. Having an actual relationship with them, so you know kind of what pressure, quote unquote, you might need to push, kind of apply to them to get that process adherence kind of improved. You know, I'm all the easier if you have like a social credit score, just a joke, but like, you know, this sort of ethics score, that's very sort of tangible. To the extent you don't have that, you just have to kind of make it happen, you know? So, you know, kind of tactically, kind of to your question, following up, you know, if you roll that, you know, if you roll out what Kirshman was talking about out across a bunch of leaders, simply following up, you know, after the meeting and saying, how did those 2 minutes you spent talking about this go? What kind of resonated with folks? And just like, who's going to win? Are you going to win? Is your initiative going to win? Or is other people's apathy or busyness going to win? I think like you have to just blast through and you have to kind of push it forward. You got to put the ball in the net. So that's not really that great advice. That's not like a silver bullet sort of recipe. But I just think like, how can you validate that this thing is being done? It's going to be done either through some kind of measurement mechanism, or it's going to be done sort of anecdotally through conversations and having your sort of finger on the pulse. Again, ideally that can sort of cascade down, and ideally, you know, there's a tone at the top relative to, you know, all these other managers, right? And so if it's an agenda for the CEO and it's a true, you know, or the division leader or whatever, if you can get their buy-in, then that can be some wind in your sails to kind of drive more of that process adherence forward. So I'm not saying it's like an easy thing, but it is definitely an achievable thing. And there's been some great ideas in the chat and, you know, from Tara and Kirshwin as well on how to kind of get some of those mechanics in place, or those mechanisms, I guess.
And I think ultimately, you know, going back to the why do it and the with them. I was just going to go back to the with them piece.
We got a little lag here. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, please, Tara, go ahead.
You know, yeah, I think at the end of the day, like trying to not just make it like an ethics integrity thing, but really tying it to the business and the results. And 100%. To me, it's all interconnected, you know, like business performance, and the data supports this. A high integrity organization is ultimately a high performing organization. It leads to better innovation and better engagement of employees. And so bringing all those things together and not just making it a separate ethics initiative, I think is what's really important.
And to that point, that point you just made cascades down to the individual manager level. There was a report that came out, I think from ECI a couple of years ago, and it was kind of comparing, it was asking respondents two different questions, and it was saying, how often does your leader talk about, you know, ethical stuff? Okay, it sounded smarter than that, of course. How often are they talking about ethics and things like that, or high integrity things? And then they asked, like on a Likert scale, how likely are you to try to like emulate this leader? And it was a crazy difference. And if a leader was talking about it, you know, frequently or beyond, they had a corresponding like 90% rate of their employees saying, this is somebody who I'm happy to follow. I would like to, you know, I'd like to sort of model my career after. Anybody that was like on like, you know, not that frequently or below, you know, kind of like middle or below, that rate dropped from 90% to under 50%. So there's a strong correlate, you know, we can argue causation and correlation and all that kind of stuff. There's at least a strong correlate between leaders who are, you know, talking about integrity type, you know, topics frequently, and the extent to which their employee base wants to follow them, which again kind of like amalgamates up into the point that Tara just made about high performing organizations are ones that have high quality, and high quality is high decision making or high quality decisions being made, high process adherence, a high degree of integrity. So I think that's a way to kind of sell, you know, I'll try to find that stat or something, but like that's a great way to sell, quote unquote, this initiative to leaders who presumably want their people to follow them and do the things that they say, you know, they should do. You know what I mean?
I cut you off. Well, first, two things. I wanted to offer a great observation from a listener here who said, tone at the top is most effective when it becomes action at the middle and then trust at the front line. Employees need to see both consistent messaging and visible follow-through from leadership. Everybody should just print that out and stick it up on the break room wall. That's such a good point. Kershwin, I did want to ask you if we could maybe step back and put this in a bigger context. Does the Justice Department and their evaluation guidelines for corporate compliance programs, like that factor into what we are talking about here, or what do those guidelines say?
How much do regulators care about this? You're just cutting out a little bit, but I think that's kind of what you're asking to Kershwin.
Nick, what a great question. I mean, I only heard part of it, but I'm sure the rest of it was perfect by Matt. I think when we think about the DOJ, and they have fundamental questions that they say a prosecutor should ask, right? One, is your compliance program well designed? Is the program applied earnestly and in good faith? And does the compliance program work in practice? So those are the three main things. And every time I've done a compliance committee meeting, I've shared those three things. This is why we have a program, and these are all the things that we've done and we want to do. So, you think about how have leaders, through their words and actions, encouraged or discouraged compliance, including the types of misconduct involved in an investigation. That's what the DOJ will look at. What concrete actions taken to demonstrate leadership at the company's compliance and remediation efforts. That's what the DOJ will look at. And so I think you also want to make sure that you can demonstrate that you have this program, in addition to all the other training we have, in addition to everything else that we do, we have this tone at the top program to reinforce this message at the top, in the middle, and we call it buzz at the bottom. And if you are ever in trouble, if you do have an investigation, this could be really good for you to share that, you had a rogue employee. You did what you needed to. You did everything you could to promote the culture of compliance and to promote ethical decision making.
One other point I would raise about the Justice Department's compliance guidelines, how to think about it. The prosecutors will always have the luxury of an actual compliance infraction at your company. They already know the facts of what went wrong, and this is why we're going to ask these questions and not other questions. You, compliance team building the program, you do not have that. You have no idea what the misconduct issue might be someday in the future, but you have to anticipate what are the programs or policies or procedures or efforts we could have in place that would lead to a more favorable outcome. This is certainly going to be one of those high impact efforts. If you can engage senior management throughout the enterprise, get them to do it consistently, get them to talk about it. Certainly then the prosecutors will start to think it's not the company's fault, it's this particular executive who did this bad thing, it's that person's fault. And you've shifted the liability and the resolution away from the company onto the actual wrongdoer, which we should remember that was the goal. So that is another point that I think is worth keeping in mind.
Exactly, Matt. If I may I think, as compliance professionals, we want to make sure that people do the right thing. That's our goal. We want to have the right culture. But I think part of our job is also to have defensible arguments for the DOJ or an OIG investigation. And this will really support that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. One other question I wanted to ask, Tara, maybe I'll put this to you. It almost sounds a bit cliche, but should we be measuring the ROI of these efforts? And is this I don't even know if return on investment is the right thing to think about on engaging the company's tone at the top. But I mean, somebody somewhere is bound to ask, what's the ROI of doing this? So what do we say to them when they do ask that question?
Yeah. Well, I absolutely think it's worth measuring the effectiveness of the work that you're doing from like a culture tone at the top perspective. And I gave the example of like the manufacturing floor where we had these stand-up 5-minute conversations we required everybody to do from a management level. And we saw an absolute effectiveness measure that was extremely positive. We saw improved speak up culture following those discussions. And when you have, a proactive speak up culture, you have fewer misses, you have fewer blind spots, you have fewer quality issues. And so, obviously fewer quality issues is better for patients and the bottom line at the end of the day. And so there is an ROI equation there. I think it's, it's difficult to sometimes prove out all of those pieces, the whole causation element. However, I think finding whether or not the tactics are effective is absolutely critical, and important to sort of continue to tell the story as to why this is important work and why it should be prioritized. And just kind of going back to the DOJ piece for a second as well, it's anecdotal to some degree, but I've definitely been in front of prosecutors who have asked those very questions, and it has helped us from a defense perspective immensely to be able to prove that you actually have this type of culture at the organization, that you can point to specific tactics of execution. And yes, exactly as Kirshwin said, you can have, in a multi-tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands employee organization, you can have people who do the wrong thing, who either malfeasance, misunderstanding, whatever it was, bad intent. But if you can show that the corporate ethos is intending to do the right thing and has done everything that it can, to me, the ROI on that is pretty incredible. You're avoiding a prosecution, you're avoiding a corporate integrity agreement, you're avoiding a deferred prosecution agreement. Those are hugely expensive things if you can avoid them.
All right.
Let's think about what ROI is. ROI is just a persuasion mechanism. It's just a point of leverage to kind of underwrite or, denote, unlike projects into sort of common terms. That's all it is. And it's just a handle for someone to understand if the effort is worth the results they think that they're going to get. So like, if we can strip away, like trying to quantify it, because I understand it's difficult to quantify, and understand that that is merely a mechanism to like try to persuade somebody to get buy-in for your project or for your initiative or whatever. Well, now that kind of opens up a bunch of other kind of persuasion paths to like arrive at that same destination. So just because you can't quantify what is the return on investment for the 2 minutes that I'm asking all the leaders to talk about ethics for, doesn't mean that that's not like a valid thing because you can't quantify it. Kind of to your point, Tara, what was the ROI of Alcoa's focus on safety? Okay, you can calculate that. I'm not saying that this is going to have the same kind of output in our organization, but I don't know. I just think like there's multiple ways to kind of persuade. And I just want to underscore the point you made. We've talked to a lot of people about DOJ stuff on this show. We've had assistant attorney generals on, former DOJ prosecutors on. And the thing that all these conversations have kind of boiled down to for me is that what the prosecutor who comes in, to Matt's point, who knows that something has gone wrong, what they're really kind of feeling around for is like, is there a good faith effort to prevent this kind of stuff? And you really stack the deck in your favor, and you stack the chicks in your favor, or whatever that saying is, when you have tangible evidence of efforts that are meant to curtail this kind of behavior. When you have a tone at the top program, when you have a speak up program that you're clearly managing and clearly, analyzing and so forth, they're looking to say like, do people, does this organization that is in front of me, do they actually care about it? Or are they, are they taking kind of reasonable steps to Kirshwin's point from a couple minutes ago to, prevent this kind of stuff from happening? So that in itself is worth the conversation in my mind, Right. I just think like we have to be able to persuade them, and we have to have the confidence and the boldness to make them feel about this thing the way we feel about it. Because if not, the odds of them drifting to that conclusion are really low.
So, and one other point is ROI is difficult to measure, right? We all know that. But you also have to do the ROI when you pitch this idea to the president. One tip I'd give you is the best time to do it is after you have a whole meeting on all the different investigations at the company. You do it a few days later and say, hey, what do you think about a tone at the top initiative? I did that, and Great. The president smiled at me and said, how can I say no after all the different investigations we had? So yeah, go ahead and do it.
There you go.
Kirshwin, I just was going to ask you for one last farewell tip, so I think that will probably have to be it. We are pretty much out of time right now, but Tara Shuchuk and Kershwin Singh, you've both given us a lot to think about. Very good practical advice. Thank you very much for it. Thank you to all the listeners. Nick, I'll let you wrap it up and take it home for us, but this has been a great session as usual.
I'm trying to figure out how we only have 4,500 emojis when there was just a treasure trove of information about this thing that can help us do our job so much more. So round of applause for these guys. This was absolutely phenomenal. I wish this session was longer. There's so much to talk about and there's so much opportunity here. But, you know, every single week we're talking about various different aspects of compliance. And, you know, again, I feel like so excited about this next chapter that we're stepping into. There's so many levers that we can pull, so many dials that we can tweak to drive our programs forward. We just can't settle for where we're at. We can't settle for that status quo. We have to be looking for opportunities for improvement. And there's so much leverage that can come from this tone at the top conversation. So you don't have to build a whole program, a whole kind of initiative to get this kind of thing started, to get this ball rolling that can, again, bring more people into this risk management apparatus that you're responsible for building and maintaining. So really encouraged by this conversation, really learned a lot in it. Next week, we have 2 great sessions on Tuesday. For those of you who are interested in seeing our Third Party Plus platform, but don't want to talk to a salesperson, all good. Come on Thursday, or on Tuesday, even if you're not in the market for it. We're going to be talking about some good takeaways on some best practices. Even if you're doing a paper program to manage these third parties, there's going to be some great takeaways there. And on Thursday, we have Haley Tedeschi coming to talk about, what's it called? It's called from debate to tactics or something like that. Yeah, sorry. From debate to deployment, a compliance officer's AI action plan. So we're going to talk about really bringing down to earth a lot of these tactics to drive AI governance forward. It's a huge risk area, a growing risk area in all of our organizations. So love you all. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next week.
Thank you.